What if the Redwood Forest, known for its towering trees and serene beauty, hides a dark secret that no one dared to speak of? A secret so horrifying it's never been told until now. Nestled in the heart of California, the Redwood Forest has long been admired for its breathtaking landscape. Its ancient trees reaching for the sky, their trunks thick and gnarled with the weight of centuries. The forest stands as a testament to nature's grandeur, a symbol of tranquility and beauty. Yet beneath its peaceful canopy, the forest harbors something far darker, something no one could have imagined. For some, the Redwood Forest is a place of awe, a serene getaway where the air smells of pine and the whisper of the wind among the leaves is the only sound that fills the silence. But for others, it is a place of terror, a cursed land that holds the memories of a massacre long forgotten by the world, but never by the restless spirits that still roam. The trees, standing like silent sentinels, carry the whispers of a tragedy that unfolded in the depths of these woods, a tragedy hidden from history, yet burned into the very essence of the forest. Imagine walking through these woods, feeling the chill in the air, the rustling leaves sounding almost too alive, too aware. The deeper you go, the stronger the sensation becomes, as if something or someone is watching you from just beyond the tree line. It's as though the very ground beneath your feet is remembering something it was never meant to remember. The trees stand tall, casting long shadows, but it's not the shadows that you should fear. It's the haunting secrets buried within the forest, whispers of the past that refuse to stay buried. This isn't just a forest, it's a place where history and myth collide, a place where the past isn't gone, but waiting, watching, and whispering. The massacre that took place here may have been forgotten by time, but the spirits of those who died are still very much alive, trapped in the whispers of the trees. And now, after all these years, their story is ready to be told. The Redwood Forest isn't just a place of beauty, it's a place where the past lingers and the spirits of the lost souls seek revenge. A place where the forest itself keeps the secrets of a horror that should never have been forgotten. What was once a haven of peace is now a battleground, where the echoes of the past never truly fade away. It was 1912, and the Redwood Forest was silent. But beneath its peaceful exterior, something darker was lurking in the shadows, something that would change the fate of those who dared to enter. The tall trees, their thick trunks intertwined with the memories of the past, stood like silent witnesses to a story that was never meant to be told. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying with it an eerie sense of anticipation, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. But back then, no one could have predicted the horrors that were about to unfold. In the heart of the forest, two unlikely souls were about to find themselves drawn into a mystery that had been buried for decades. Alex, a young documentary filmmaker, had always been captivated by the unknown. His thirst for uncovering hidden truths had led him to many dark corners of the world, but nothing could have prepared him for what lay ahead. Alex's passion was clear. He was determined to shine a light on the secrets that had remained in the dark for far too long, and he believed that the Redwood Forest held the answers to a forgotten tragedy. Alongside him was Sarah, a local historian with deep roots in the area. She had grown up hearing the whispers, the legends, and the warnings of the forest's dark past. Her family had lived on the outskirts of the Redwood Forest for generations, but no one in her family had ever dared to uncover the truth. Sarah, unlike Alex, was more cautious. Her curiosity was tempered by the old stories passed down from her ancestors, stories of a massacre, a curse, and restless spirits that still haunted the land. She had always wondered about the truth behind these tales, but fear had kept her from digging too deep. When Alex and Sarah met, it was as if fate had brought them together. Their shared interest in the forest's history, though different in nature, forged an undeniable bond between them. Alex, driven by his need to uncover the truth, was determined to investigate the forest's dark past. Sarah, with her knowledge of local folklore and her personal connection to the land, knew that the forest held secrets no one was ready to confront. But together they couldn't resist the pull of the unknown. Little did they know, their journey into the heart of the Redwood Forest would unlock something that could never be undone. The forest had long been silent, but it wasn't peaceful. It was waiting for the right people to come, to unravel the story that had been hidden away for far too long. And as Alex and Sarah made their way deeper into the woods, they unknowingly stepped into a tale of vengeance, horror, and tragedy, one that would test their courage, their sanity, and their very lives. Alex and Sarah stood at the edge of the Redwood Forest, their gaze sweeping over the towering trees that loomed like ancient giants. The air was thick with mystery, the kind that hung heavy between the forest's branches, whispering of secrets long buried beneath the layers of time. The stories they had heard, the eerie tales of strange happenings, of sightings that couldn't be explained, had only fueled their curiosity. The legends of the forest had haunted Sarah's mind since childhood, but Alex's hunger for the truth had drawn him to the forest for a different reason altogether. He was driven by the need to uncover what was hidden, to expose the forgotten history that lay dormant in the shadows. Despite the warnings they had received, neither of them could turn back now. Locals had spoken of the eerie presence that lingered in the woods, of the unsettling feeling that gripped anyone who ventured too deep. "It's not a place for the faint of heart," one of the old-timers had told them. "The forest is alive and it remembers things that should never have been forgotten." But Alex and Sarah were not faint of heart. They were drawn to the mystery, to the history that no one seemed brave enough to explore. Alex's passion for documentary filmmaking was rooted in a deep-seated belief that some stories needed to be told, no matter how dark or uncomfortable. He had made films about places untouched by time, unearthing truths that had been buried by the passage of years. But there was something different about this one. The Redwood Forest had a pull on him, a magnetic force he couldn't quite explain. The forest, with its ancient trees and long-forgotten history, seemed to be calling out to him, urging him to uncover its buried secrets. He wanted to expose the history that the world had chosen to forget, to show the hidden side of the forest that the locals had long kept locked away. And what better way to do that than through his documentary? But Sarah's connection to the forest was far more personal. Growing up on the outskirts of the Redwood Forest, she had heard the stories from her grandparents, passed down through generations, stories of the forest's dark past, of a massacre that no one dared speak of, and of a curse that still lingered in the shadows. Her family had lived in the area for generations, but no one had ever ventured into the heart of the forest to uncover the truth. The very idea of stepping into those woods sent a shiver down her spine, but she knew that her time had come. The legends had been a part of her family's history, but they had never fully understood the extent of the forest's dark hold over the land. Sarah felt a deep-rooted need to uncover the truth of her family's connection to the forest, connection that had been shrouded in fear and silence for so long. As the decision to enter the forest became inevitable, Sarah found herself torn between her fear and her resolve. She had heard the whispers her whole life, had felt the weight of the forest's history pressing down on her, but she had never been able to confront it. Now, standing with Alex, she knew she had no choice. The forest had always been there, lurking in the back of her mind, but it was time to face it head-on. Alex, on the other hand, had no such hesitation. His mind was already racing with ideas for the documentary. He could almost see the finished product in his mind's eye, the interviews, the footage of the forest, the chilling tales that would unfold in the dark corners of the woods. He was determined to tell the story of the Redwood Forest in a way no one had ever done before. This wasn't just about uncovering a forgotten massacre, it was about giving the forest a voice, about allowing the truth to finally be heard. He was convinced that the forest had its own story to tell, a story that had been waiting to be discovered. and he was willing to do whatever it took to uncover it. With their plans set in motion, Alex and Sarah packed their gear. Alex's camera equipment, Sarah's notebooks filled with local folklore, and the quiet determination that radiated from both of them as they stepped toward the forest's edge. Each step was a step toward the unknown. The forest was calling, and they were about to answer. They ventured deeper into the woods, the shadows growing longer with every step. The trees towered above them, their branches twisting in the wind like ancient hands reaching out to pull them further into the heart of the forest. The path was narrow and overgrown, and each turn seemed to take them further from the world they knew. The air felt thick, charged with a strange energy. There was something about the place that felt alive, as if the very earth beneath their feet was watching, waiting. Despite the warnings, despite the unease that settled in their bones, Alex and Sarah pressed on. Their resolve was unwavering. This was their chance to uncover the truth, to bring to light the history that had been hidden for so long. The deeper they went, the more they realized that the Redwood Forest was not just a place, it was a living, breathing entity with a dark and twisted past that was waiting to reveal itself. And as the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the forest floor, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were no longer just visitors in the Redwood Forest. They were part of its story now. And that story was far darker than they could have ever imagined. The deeper Alex and Sarah ventured into the Redwood Forest, the more unsettling the surroundings became. What had started as a quiet and peaceful exploration quickly turned into something far more sinister. At first, it was a slight chill in the air, so faint that they brushed it off as nothing more than a passing breeze. But as the minutes stretched into hours, the cold intensified, creeping into their bones, making the forest feel unnaturally frigid. It wasn't the crisp coolness that you'd expect from the highlands, it was something else. Something that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. Every step they took seemed to echo louder than the last. The sound of their footsteps, once muffled by the dense underbrush, began to fade, as if the ground itself was swallowing the noise. And then there were other footsteps, soft, almost imperceptible, but definitely there. It was as though they weren't alone, as though someone was walking right behind them, always just out of sight. They exchanged uneasy glances, but neither of them spoke about it aloud. What could they say? That they were hearing things? But the sensation lingered, pressing down on them like an invisible weight. Every now and then, a rustling of leaves would snap them out of their reverie, but each time they turned, the woods were just as still as before. It was as if the forest itself was alive, breathing in rhythm with them, watching their every move. The deeper they went, the darker the atmosphere became. The trees, once majestic and inviting, now loomed over them like towering sentinels. Their branches twisted in strange, unnatural shapes, bending towards them as if trying to pull them in, to trap them in a maze of their own making. Shadows danced in the periphery of their vision, disappearing whenever they tried to focus on them. The very air seemed thick with something they couldn't quite grasp. It felt wrong, as if the forest was slowly turning against them. As they moved further into the heart of the Redwood Forest, the whispers began. At first, it was so soft that they thought it was the wind. But then the whispers grew clearer, faint, unintelligible words that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. Sarah's heart raced, and Alex's pulse quickened. They stopped in their tracks, straining to listen, but the words slipped away just as quickly as they appeared. Yet they both felt it, a connection, a call. The trees seemed to murmur their names, their voices dripping with ancient sorrow and anger. It was as though the very forest itself had a memory, and it was trying to communicate with them. But they pressed on, unwilling to turn back, driven by the need to uncover the truth. They had come this far, and they couldn't let their fear stop them now. Later that day, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor, They encountered an elderly man on the outskirts of a small village near the forest's edge. He was hunched over, his face wrinkled like the bark of an old tree. His eyes gleamed with a strange mixture of caution and something else, something darker. When Alex and Sarah mentioned their plans to explore the Redwood Forest, his expression faltered and his voice lowered to a whisper. "You two don't know what you're walking into," he warned them. "That forest isn't what you think. It's cursed. It's been cursed for as long as anyone can remember. The spirits of those who died there, those settlers, they still haunt the woods. They're not at rest. They're angry, and they won't let you leave once you've crossed their path." The warning wasn't new to Sarah. She had heard similar tales from her grandmother, but she had always dismissed them as exaggerated folklore. The old man's words felt different, though there was a weight to them, an unsettling certainty that shook her to her core. Alex, ever the skeptic, brushed it off with a laugh. "It's just a story. People love to make up scary tales, but we'll be fine. We've come this far already." But the look in the old man's eyes stayed with Sarah, gnawing at her. She wanted to ask more questions, to understand why he was so afraid. But the man turned and walked away without another word, leaving them with more questions than answers. With the warnings lingering in their minds, Alex and Sarah pressed on, determined to uncover what had been hidden for so long. Yet even as they continued, the whispers seemed to follow them, and the trees grew even darker, more twisted. It felt as though the forest was waiting for something, or someone. Their fear had become palpable, but their curiosity was stronger. They were too close now to turn back. The deeper they went, the more they realized that the forest was no longer just a collection of ancient trees. It was something far more alive, far more dangerous, a place that held memories of a time long past, memories that should have stayed forgotten. The further they went, the more they understood that the curse wasn't just a tale. It was real, and they had just become part of it. In 1912, a group of settlers arrived at the Redwood Forest, eager to claim the land as their own. They had heard whispers of the forest's vast beauty, its towering trees, and the wealth it could offer, but there was no mention of the dangers that lay hidden beneath its tranquil surface. For these men and women, the Redwood Forest was just another frontier to conquer, a place ripe for farming and building, a piece of land waiting to be tamed. But the land they had come to possess was already inhabited by something far older than they could comprehend, the spirits of the indigenous people who had lived there for centuries. The local tribes had long understood the sacredness of the forest. They knew that the redwood trees were more than just trees. They were the keepers of memories, of ancient knowledge. The land had been a spiritual home for generations, and the indigenous people had always treated it with reverence. It wasn't just a place for survival. It was a place of connection, a place where life and death were intertwined in ways the settlers could never grasp. The forest was sacred, but it also harbored a curse that had been placed on the land long before the first European settlers ever set foot on it. When the settlers arrived, eager to establish their homes and build their new life, the indigenous people warned them to stay away. The elders spoke of the curse that hung over the forest, of the spirits who still roamed the land, restless and angry. They told the settlers that the Redwood Forest was not theirs to take, that it belonged to the land and its spirits. The settlers, however, saw only opportunity. The warning was brushed aside as superstition, something born from a primitive culture that they had no intention of respecting. They believed they could tame the land, build their homes, cultivate the soil, and live as they pleased. The spirits, they thought, were nothing more than myths, and they laughed at the idea of being threatened by such things. But the settlers' arrogance would cost them dearly. That night, under a blood-red moon, the forest came alive with an ancient fury. It was as if the trees themselves had awakened, their massive trunks creaking and groaning in the wind, as if the very earth beneath the settlers' feet was trembling with anger. The indigenous people, having long been the guardians of the forest, knew that this was the moment to act. They had been patient, warning the settlers time and time again, but now there would be no more warnings. The settlers had crossed a line, and the spirits of the land demanded retribution. Under the cover of darkness, the indigenous warriors moved through the forest like shadows, silent and swift. The settlers were caught unaware, their fires flickering out. As the warriors closed in, it was a brutal, merciless attack, one that would echo through the centuries. The settlers, unaware of the ancient rituals that governed the forest, fought back with all their might, but they were outmatched. The warriors, guided by the spirits of the land, were unstoppable. The settlers' cries for mercy were drowned by the howling wind as the massacre unfolded. The battle raged throughout the night, and as the first light of dawn began to break, the Redwood Forest was stained with the blood of the invaders. It wasn't just a massacre, it was a ritual. The indigenous people, guided by the spirits, had slaughtered the settlers in order to appease the wrath of the land. It was a brutal act, but it was one that had been necessary. The settlers had come to claim something that didn't belong to them, something that could not be taken without consequences. And so, the land had reclaimed its own. As the warriors disappeared into the forest, leaving behind the bodies of the settlers, the redwood trees stood tall, their massive branches reaching for the sky as though they had witnessed the tragedy unfold. The spirits of the fallen settlers were not allowed to rest. The bloodshed had bound them to the forest, their souls trapped in the very trees they had hoped to conquer. They were not at peace, they were angry, and they would not forget. The curse that had been placed on the Redwood Forest was not just a warning, it was a bond, a curse that could never be undone. The spirits of the settlers, trapped in the forest for all eternity, would never find peace. Their restless souls would continue to haunt the land, forever tied to the place they had tried to claim for themselves. And the Redwood Forest, once a symbol of life and renewal, became something else entirely, a place of death, a place where the past and the present collided, where the echoes of the past could still be heard in the rustling of the leaves and the creaking of the ancient trees. The settlers' blood had stained the soil, and that stain could never be washed away. The spirits of the fallen settlers were bound to the forest, unable to escape the land that had taken their lives. The curse of the Redwood Forest was now complete, and it would continue to claim anyone who dared enter, anyone who dared disturb the peace of the land. The spirits would always be there, watching, waiting, their whispers carried on the wind, urging others to stay away. But those who were brave or foolish enough to ignore the warnings would find themselves drawn into the forest's grip, unable to escape the horrors that lay within. In the years that followed, the Redwood Forest became a place of legend, a place where those who entered never returned. The curse of the forest was a tale whispered among locals, but few dared venture deep enough into the woods to see the truth for themselves. But the truth was there, waiting. The blood of the settlers had stained the land, and the spirits of the past were still very much alive. The Redwood Forest had become a place of death, a place where the past never truly left, a place where the spirits of the slain settlers continued their search for vengeance, their cries echoing through the trees. And anyone who entered the forest would become a part of that dark history, forever trapped in the curse that bound them to the land. The massacre did not end with death. The settlers, whose lives were brutally taken that night under the blood-red moon, were bound to the Redwood Forest in ways that no one could have imagined. Their deaths, horrific as they were, did not free them. Instead, their spirits, trapped in the very forest they had tried to claim, became part of the land itself, cursed to wander for eternity. They were no longer just victims of a violent act. They became the forest's prisoners, tethered to the earth by the ancient curse that had been awakened by their greed. The Redwood Forest, once a symbol of life, had transformed into a prison for their restless souls. As the years passed, the spirits of the settlers remained trapped in the forest, their presence felt by anyone who dared to venture too far into its depths. The curse ensured that they could never escape. their souls caught between the world of the living and the dead. They were neither fully alive nor fully dead, suspended in a state of eternal unrest. Their screams, once drowned out by the chaos of their violent end, now echoed through the trees, a haunting reminder of the forest's dark past. It was as if the trees themselves whispered their names, the very air thick with their sorrow and anger. But it wasn't just sorrow that the spirits carried, it was rage. The settlers' deaths were not simply a tragedy, they were an injustice. They had been cut down before their time, robbed of their chance to fulfill their dreams and build their lives. The curse that bound them to the forest wasn't just a punishment for their actions, it was a mechanism for their vengeance. And so the spirits, fueled by a relentless need for revenge, began to haunt the Redwood Forest, waiting for anyone foolish enough to disturb their domain. The spirits were not content to remain in the shadows. They were restless, angry, and vengeful. Each soul that had been violently torn from life by the indigenous people's ritual became a fragment of the forest itself. They could no longer walk among the living, but their anger and frustration transformed them into an almost tangible force. Those who dared to enter the forest found themselves drawn into an unspoken battle, an unseen war between the living and the dead. The spirits, now linked to the land by the curse, did not want peace. They sought only to avenge their untimely deaths. They yearned for retribution, for the suffering of others to match the suffering they had endured. The curse, ancient and powerful, made sure that anyone who dared to enter the Redwood Forest would feel the wrath of the spirits. The settlers' restless souls were always watching, always waiting for someone to make the mistake of trespassing. When strangers entered their domain, the spirits would awaken, their fury igniting once more. It didn't matter who the intruders were or what their intentions were. The spirits of the settlers, trapped in their eternal state of limbo, had one purpose: revenge. The forest, now a place of death and dread, became their hunting ground. But the spirits were not bound to the earth merely for their own vengeance. They had been cast into this eternal struggle by forces beyond their understanding. The curse was a punishment, yes, but it was also a trap. It was a force that did not simply punish, it also ensnared. It kept them tethered to the land, trapped in an endless loop of anger and sorrow. The spirits of the settlers were unable to move on, unable to find peace. Their fate was sealed the moment they died. They could never be free. Those who encountered the spirits felt their rage the moment they stepped into the forest. It was an oppressive presence, something that clung to the very air, suffocating the intruders. The further they went, the more they could feel it, the sensation of being watched, followed, as if the trees themselves were alive, holding 1,000 eyes that never blinked. The spirits, now an intrinsic part of the forest, made it their mission to ensure that no one left unscathed. They did not care who entered the forest, they only cared that they were disturbed. Anyone who stepped too far into their territory was met with the same fate: torment, fear, and the slow unraveling of their sanity. The curse, once awakened, could not be undone. It had woven itself into the very fabric of the forest. And now the land itself was complicit in keeping the settlers' souls trapped. The trees, the ground, the air, everything became a conduit for the spirits' anger and their need for revenge. The deeper one ventured into the forest, the stronger the feeling of being hunted. The spirits did not need to show themselves physically. Their presence was felt in the whispers carried by the wind, in the unnatural chill that crept into your bones, in the shadowy figures that danced just out of sight. The forest itself became a labyrinth, twisting and turning, always changing to trap those who entered too far. But it wasn't just fear that the spirits imparted, it was a sense of inevitability. The settlers in life had been driven by greed, their desire to take what didn't belong to them. Now, as spirits, they were bound to the land, cursed to witness the forest they had tried to tame, to feel the anger of the land they had desecrated. They were not just spirits seeking revenge, they were embodiments of the curse itself. The Redwood Forest had become a place of endless torment, a place where time no longer mattered. The spirits of the settlers were trapped in an eternal cycle, their rage and sorrow feeding the curse that would never release them. The spirits would always remain, waiting for the next unwitting soul to wander into their grasp. The curse would never be lifted, for the land had claimed them, and now they were a part of the forest. Their need for revenge had become the forest's heartbeat, echoing in every rustle of the leaves, in every sigh of the wind. And anyone who crossed into their domain would know the forest's anger, the price of disturbing what had been left undisturbed for so long. In the Redwood Forest, the past was never truly gone. It lingered, waiting for its chance to strike. The spirits of the settlers, bound to the forest, would always be there, watching, whispering, and waiting for the next soul to join them in their eternal suffering. As Alex and Sarah ventured deeper into the Redwood Forest, the air around them seemed to thicken, charged with a tension they couldn't explain. What had once been a simple exploration, driven by curiosity and a thirst for uncovering the truth, was now beginning to feel like something much darker. The deeper they traveled, the more the forest seemed to change. The towering trees, which once seemed like silent sentinels, now felt oppressive, as if they were closing in around them. It was as though the forest itself was aware of their presence, watching them, judging them. At first, it was subtle and unsettling shift in the wind, the faint sound of branches creaking in a way that didn't quite match the breeze. But soon, it became undeniable. The trees began to move, not in the natural sway that Alex and Sarah had seen before, but in strange, jerky motions, as if they were alive, reacting to their presence. The wind, once gentle, now howled through the branches, twisting around them like a living thing. It was as though the forest had come to life, and it was angry. Then they started to notice something else. Strange symbols carved deep into the bark of the trees began to appear as they walked. At first, Alex thought they might be the markings of previous explorers, or even natural markings on the trees. But as they grew more frequent, he realized something was wrong. The symbols were unfamiliar, jagged, and unnatural, as if they were etched with purpose, deliberately, intentionally. They were too precise to be the work of nature. Alex, with his keen eye for detail, couldn't shake the feeling that these markings were meant for them. But why? And who or what had left them? Sarah, who had always been more in tune with the stories and legends of the land, felt a chill crawl down her spine as she looked at the symbols. They reminded her of the old tales her grandmother had told her as a child, stories of ancient rituals, of curses and spirits that could be summoned with the right markings, the right symbols. The symbols on the trees seemed to align with the stories she had once dismissed as nothing more than local superstition. But now, standing in the middle of the forest, surrounded by those very symbols, it was hard for her to ignore the rising sense of dread. As they pressed on, the feeling of being watched became overwhelming. It was subtle at first, like a shadow just beyond their vision, but soon it was inescapable. Every rustling of the leaves, every crack of a twig, made them turn around expecting to see someone or something behind them, but no one was ever there. The forest was silent save for the whispers that now seemed to echo through the trees. At first, they thought it was the wind again, but these whispers were different. They weren't random gusts of air, they were voices, faint but unmistakable. They couldn't make out the words, but the urgency was clear. It was as though the voices were calling to them, warning them, or perhaps even demanding something. The hairs on the back of their necks stood up, and the feeling of being followed intensified. They began to feel like they were being stalked, though whenever they turned around, the forest was just as still as it had been moments before. The shadows around them seemed to move in unnatural ways. The trees, which had once seemed solid and unyielding, now appeared to shift, their trunks twisting in the dimming light, bending at odd angles. The once gentle breeze now felt cold and suffocating, like fingers brushing against their skin. The air around them seemed to vibrate with the weight of something unseen, something ancient and angry. "Do you feel it?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. She wasn't sure if she was speaking to Alex or to the forest itself. It felt as if the forest was alive, breathing with them, following them, its presence pressing in on them from all sides. Alex didn't respond at first, his eyes scanning the trees, trying to make sense of what was happening. But he too felt it, the oppressive weight, the sense of being trapped in something far beyond their control. The whispers grew louder now, almost as if the voices were speaking directly to them. They could hear snippets of words, their meanings just out of reach, like fragments of a dream fading as they woke. But the tone of the voices was unmistakable, urgent, frantic, full of warning and rage. Alex's heart raced as he tried to decipher the sounds, but they slipped away, leaving him with nothing but a rising sense of dread. As they walked, the forest seemed to warp around them. The path they had been following no longer felt familiar. The trees, once towering and majestic, now seemed twisted and malformed, as if the very nature of the forest had begun to change in response to their presence. The sun, which had been high in the sky when they first entered, was now hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, casting the forest in an eerie twilight. The shadows grew longer, stretching out like fingers trying to grasp at them. "Something's not right," Alex muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "This place, it feels like it's alive." Sarah didn't need him to say it out loud to know what he was thinking. She could feel it too. The forest was alive, but not in the way they had imagined. It wasn't a peaceful, vibrant ecosystem. It was something much darker, much more malevolent. It was as if the land itself resented their intrusion, as if the spirits trapped within it had begun to stir, awakened by their presence. Every step they took seemed to take them deeper into the heart of the forest, where the trees grew even more twisted, their bark dark and gnarled, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal hands. The whispers grew louder, the shadows deeper. It felt as though the very forest was closing in around them, trapping them in its dark embrace. They were no longer just visitors. They were part of the forest's story now, and it was a story they had no way of escaping. The further they went, the more they realized that they weren't just being followed, they were being hunted. The spirits, restless and vengeful, were closing in on them, and the forest itself seemed to be aiding them. Each step they took only drew them deeper into the forest's grip, and every glance over their shoulders revealed more shadows, more movement, just out of reach. Something was coming for them, something that had been waiting for years, and it wasn't going to let them leave without facing the wrath of the Redwood Forest. As Alex and Sarah pushed deeper into the heart of the Redwood Forest, they stumbled upon something unexpected. Hidden among the trees, half sunken into the earth as if swallowed by time itself, was a cabin abandoned, weather-worn, and shrouded in an eerie silence. The sight of it was jarring. They had expected to find remnants of the past, perhaps a few old tools, some broken furniture, but this cabin felt different. It seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as if it had been waiting for them. Reluctantly they approached, their steps hesitant, weighed down by the oppressive air around them. The door creaked open with a low groan, revealing a dimly lit interior. Dust motes danced in the stale air, and the smell of old wood and decay hung heavy. The cabin was abandoned, that much was clear, but there was something oddly deliberate about its disrepair. It was as if time had been suspended here, waiting for the right moment to reveal its secrets. Inside, scattered across a wooden table, were old maps and faded photographs of the settlers' faces frozen in time, eyes filled with hope for the future. Alex carefully flipped through the papers, but it was Sarah who found it. A journal, its leather cover cracked and fragile from age. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The first page yellowed with age, the ink smudged, but still legible. As she read aloud, Alex's heart began to race. The journal belonged to one of the settlers, and its contents were far darker than anything they had imagined. The first few pages described the settlers' excitement and ambition as they arrived in the Redwood Forest. eager to build a new life. But then the tone of the journal began to shift. The entries grew darker, more frantic, as the writer described unsettling occurrences, strange noises in the night, shadows that moved in the corners of their vision, and an unexplainable sense of being watched. But it was the last entry that sent a chill down their spines. The settler, in a panic, wrote about the ritual that had taken place on the fateful night of the massacre. It was not an ordinary attack. No, the settlers hadn't just been killed. They had been sacrificed, bound in a ritual meant to summon a vengeful spirit. The indigenous people, the ones who had warned them away, hadn't just been defending their land, they had been performing a sacred ceremony. The settlers, in their arrogance, had ignored the warnings and had forced the spirit's hand. The journal detailed the sacrifice, how the settlers had been bound to the trees, their blood spilled upon the soil in a desperate attempt to appease the vengeful spirit that had been unleashed. The writer described the dark figures that had surrounded them, chanting words in a language that was foreign, ancient. The last thing the settler wrote before his death was a warning, a plea for anyone who would read these words. The curse was not over. It was just beginning. The journal ended abruptly, the ink smeared in places as if the writer had been interrupted in the midst of writing. But Sarah and Alex didn't need to read more. The horror was clear. The settlers had been more than victims. They had been pawns in a ritual, their deaths part of something far larger than they could have understood. The forest, it seemed, had claimed them, and their souls had been bound to the land. But that wasn't all. There was more, buried deep within the pages of the journal. Sarah turned the page carefully, her hands trembling. Hidden in the back of the journal was a crude drawing, a map of the forest. Marked on the map was a location deep within the trees, an area where the land seemed to warp and shift. The journal's final entry, written in desperate strokes, told of a relic. Buried in the heart of the forest, a relic that could break the curse and free the trapped souls of the settlers. The relic, however, came with a terrible price. To retrieve it would mean facing the spirits themselves, risking everything in an attempt to undo what had been done. The map, though hastily drawn, was clear enough. There was a place in the forest, hidden from view, where the relic was buried. But it wasn't just the relic they had to worry about. The spirits of the settlers, trapped between the world of the living and the dead, were restless, vengeful, and unforgiving. The journal made it clear that anyone who ventured into the forest to find the relic would awaken the spirit's wrath. Alex and Sarah exchanged uneasy glances. They had come to uncover the truth, to expose the hidden history of the Redwood Forest. But this, the knowledge of the curse, the ritual, and the relic, changed everything. They had thought they were uncovering forgotten history, but now it seemed like they were about to become part of it. "Do you think it's real?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible, as if speaking louder would make the forest hear them. "I don't know," Alex replied, his mind racing. "But the journal, the map, it's all too detailed to be a coincidence. This curse, these spirits, they're not just stories. They're real." The air in the cabin felt thicker now, the weight of the journal's contents pressing down on them. The knowledge they had uncovered had shifted everything. What they had thought was a simple exploration had turned into something much darker, much more dangerous. But the more they thought about it, the more they realized they had no choice but to continue. The curse, the spirits, the relicit, was all part of the story they had come to uncover. They couldn't turn back now, but the road ahead would not be easy. The relic was hidden deep within the forest, and retrieving it would require them to face the very spirits they had read about in the journal. There was no guarantee they would survive what lay ahead. The forest, it seemed, would not give up its secrets without a fight. Alex closed the journal slowly, the weight of what they had learned settling heavily in his chest. "We need to find it," he said, determination flickering in his eyes. "We need to break the curse, but we need to be prepared. This isn't just about finding a relic, it's about facing what's been haunting this forest for over a century." Sarah nodded, a sense of dread settling over her. "Let's go," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that clung to her every word. "We don't have a choice." They left the cabin behind, the journal now heavy in Alex's bag, as they set off deeper into the forest. The map would lead them to the relic, but it would also lead them straight into the heart of the curse. And once they ventured further into the Redwood Forest, they would no longer be just observers of its history, they would be part of it. And the spirits were waiting. The deeper Alex and Sarah ventured into the forest, the more the air seemed to thicken with an invisible weight, the oppressive sense of being hunted. They had been aware of the presence around them for hours, but it was now impossible to ignore. The spirits had fully manifested, their vengeful energy seeping through the very fabric of the forest. It wasn't just the chilling whispers anymore, or the flickering shadows at the corner of their eyes. It was the unmistakable feeling of being pursued, stalked, as if the forest itself was alive and breathing, a maze that constantly shifted to lead them deeper into its grasp. The trees no longer seemed like the silent sentinels they had once been. Their gnarled branches twisted unnaturally, forming twisted paths, closing in behind them like walls. With each turn they made, the forest grew darker, more oppressive, the very ground beneath their feet seeming to shift and sway, as if it were trying to swallow them whole. The faint rustling of leaves turned into a constant, haunting cacophony of sounds, muffled whispers rising to an unbearable crescendo. There was no way out now, they were trapped. And then, just as they thought they couldn't run any longer, they saw Haimon's spirit, taller than the others, more solid in form, his presence dominating the darkness. His face, though pale and drawn with the agony of centuries, was unmistakably human. His eyes, glowing with an unnatural light, locked onto theirs, and in that moment, time seemed to stop. The air grew colder, the very temperature of the forest dropping as his voice rang out, booming and unnatural in the stillness. "You've trespassed into a place you cannot escape," he said, his voice a low, resonant growl, the sound echoing through the trees. "The curse of this land has claimed you, but you have a choice." Alex and Sarah froze. The spirits had been tormenting them for what felt like an eternity, but now it was as if the forest itself was giving them a chance and opportunity to end the chase, to escape the relentless pursuit that had been growing more dangerous with every step they took. The spirit's form flickered in and out of existence, his features shifting as if he was struggling to remain in this world, but his words were clear, and they rang with a finality that sent a chill down their spines. "You can sacrifice one of you to save the other. Give up your soul to the forest, and the other will be free to go," he continued, his voice still heavy with the weight of vengeance. "But if you refuse, if you choose to fight, the forest will consume you both, forever." Alex and Sarah exchanged a glance, their hearts pounding in their chests. The choice before them was impossible. How could they choose one over the other? It wasn't just a question of life and death. It was a question of abandoning someone they had fought so hard to protect, someone they had come to rely on. The thought of sacrificing one of them was unbearable. But the alternative was unimaginable. The spirit's form shimmered, becoming more solid, his eyes burning with a fierce intensity. The air around them seemed to crackle with energy, the trees groaning as if in protest, and the earth beneath their feet pulsed like a living thing. The forest had already claimed so much, it would not let them leave easily. "You will never escape without making a choice," the spirit hissed, his voice growing colder, more insistent. "The curse demands balance. One must pay the price, or the forest will take both of you." Alex's breath caught in his throat as the weight of the decision crushed him. Every instinct screamed at him to resist, to find a way out without sacrificing anyone, but deep down he knew that the forest would not let them go without a price, and he knew that in the end, this was their only way out. I won't let you sacrifice yourself," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and resolve. Her eyes locked onto his, pleading, but there was something else in them too. Something darker, something born of the realization that the choice they faced was more complicated than either of them had anticipated. "We're in this together," Alex replied, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "No matter what happens, we face this together." But the spirit wasn't finished. He stepped forward, his form flickering like a fading ember, his presence overwhelming. "You may refuse," the spirit said, his voice now a venomous hiss, "but your defiance will be your doom. The forest will not relent. It will tear you apart, piece by piece, until nothing remains. The curse cannot be broken without a sacrifice." The tension between them was unbearable, the silence suffocating. The weight of the curse hung heavily in the air, pressing down on them from all sides. Alex could feel the cold fingers of fear creeping into his chest, but he could also feel something else, a determination, a spark of defiance that refused to give in. There had to be another way. There had to be something they could do to break the curse without surrendering to the forest. But as the spirit loomed over them, his glowing eyes burning with an intensity that seemed to pierce through to their very souls, Alex realized the terrifying truth. They were caught in a trap. The curse had ensnared them, and now it demanded payment. The decision wasn't just a question of life or death. It was a choice between freedom and eternity, a choice between surrendering to the darkness or fighting back against it, no matter the cost. And as the spirit's form grew ever closer, his presence pressing them into submission, Alex and Sarah were left with nothing but the stark, crushing reality of the moment. Their fate was no longer in their hands. The spirit's words echoed through the air, a final warning, a decree that would shape the outcome of everything that followed. "The forest has claimed you. Now you must choose." And in that moment, Alex and Sarah realized that whatever choice they made, the forest would never let them leave unscathed. The curse had bound them, and now it would take what was due. The tension in the forest was unbearable. The ancient trees seemed to lean in closer, their gnarled branches twisting like fingers, as if the forest itself was watching and waiting. Alex and Sarah, heartbeats thundering in their chests, knew they were at the edge of something much darker than they had ever imagined. The choice they faced had become something more than just a decision of life and death. It had become a fight for their very souls. The spirit, still hovering before them, demanded an answer. The forest, alive with the restless energy of the spirits, seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. The air around them was thick with the weight of centuries of rage and sorrow. It was as though time had stopped, and every breath they took was weighed down by the curse that hung over them. "We don't have time," Alex whispered, his voice tight with fear and resolve. "We need to act now." Sarah's eyes were wide with fear, but beneath that fear was something stronger, a quiet resolve. She knew what needed to be done, but the thought of what they had to face next made her stomach twist with dread. The spirits weren't going to just let them go. They would have to fight, not only for their lives, but for their very souls. With no time left to consider their options, Alex and Sarah charged toward the heart of the forest, where the relic that could break the curse was rumored to lie. The spirits, now fully enraged, surged forward, their ethereal forms moving with a terrifying speed. Shadows darted around them, flickering and vanishing, their cold, vengeful whispers growing louder, more insistent. Every step they took felt like they were sinking deeper into the forest's grip. It wasn't just a physical battle, it was a war of wills, a desperate struggle against the very forces of darkness that had held the land captive for so long. As they moved through the trees, the spirits closed in, their forms becoming more solid, more real. Each time Alex and Sarah thought they were gaining ground, the forest seemed to twist and shift, pulling them deeper into its labyrinthine grip. The spirits' faces flashed before their eyes, twisted, anguished, and vengeful. They weren't just haunting them, they were hunting them, driven by a centuries-old thirst for revenge that had never been quenched. The closer they got to the relic, the more the spirits pushed back, their cold fingers reaching for them, their eyes filled with fury. It was as if the very fabric of reality was warping, the boundary between the living and the dead becoming less distinct with every passing moment. Then they found it, a hidden clearing, the ground marked by strange, ancient symbols. In the center lay the relic, a small, intricately carved stone, glowing faintly in the dim light of the forest. The moment Alex and Sarah laid eyes on it, the forest seemed to react. The air grew heavier, more suffocating. The trees shook and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The spirits were closing in, their vengeful wails growing louder as if they knew what was coming. Alex reached for the relic, but as his hand touched the stone, the ground beneath them cracked open and the spirits rushed forward, their hands reaching out to pull them into the darkness. Sarah screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the deafening roar of the wind. The forest was alive, its energy swirling around them, and the spirits were no longer just shadows, they were real, solid, and desperate. In that moment, Alex and Sarah understood the price of breaking the curse. The relic was their only hope, but using it meant risking everything. One of them would have to remain behind, bound forever to the forest, in order for the other to escape. It was the only way to free the trapped souls and bring an end to the curse. Alex turned to Sarah, his heart breaking as he realized the depth of what was at stake. "You have to take it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You have to go. You can't stay here." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but there was no time to argue. She nodded, her voice choked with emotion. "No, Alex, we do this together. I won't leave you." But as the spirits closed in, their twisted faces full of hatred, Alex made the decision for them. With a final desperate act, he pushed Sarah toward the relic. "You have to go, Sarah. Please, you have to live." In a burst of light, Sarah was thrown back, the relic glowing with an intense, blinding light. The spirits screamed in fury, but as the light spread, they began to dissipate, their forms fading into nothingness. The curse was finally breaking. When the light faded, Sarah found herself outside the forest, gasping for air, her heart racing. She stumbled to her feet, looking back toward the Redwood Forest, but it was too late. The forest stood silent, as if nothing had ever happened. The spirits were gone, but the price had been paid. Alex had sacrificed himself to free them, to end the curse. Dawn was breaking, the first light of day spilling over the horizon. But even as Sarah stood there, free from the forest's grip, she knew something had changed. The curse was broken, but Alex's sacrifice weighed heavily on her heart. She had escaped, but at what cost? Had they truly broken the curse, or was it simply waiting for the next unwitting soul to stumble into its grasp? The forest remained silent, but its darkness was far from gone. It was only a matter of time before someone else would be drawn in, another victim to the Redwood Forest's insidious curse. And Sarah, standing at the edge of the woods, knew that no matter how far she ran, the forest's shadow would never truly let her go. The silence of the forest was deafening, its secrets hidden beneath the canopy of trees. The spirits had been freed, but at what cost? The curse may have been lifted, but the darkness still lingered, waiting, watching, ready to claim the next soul, brave or foolish enough to enter its depths. And Sarah, carrying the weight of what had happened, was left to wonder if she would ever truly escape the haunting presence of the Redwood Forest.